Courttia and I have known each other for a long time, as a lot of people might know. Plus the anthologies like we did of IC3. Somebody was asking about microfiction. I said, go and speak to Courttia, because Courttia knows about microfiction.
Not for a long time.
Just for things like that. And then IC3 was republished again for, up to its 20th anniversary. It's not like we're 20, we're just saying, we just made up that figure of 20. It was like 20. So it's really good to have him here. And I know in terms of his journey on the speculative writing narrative has been a long one, as has so many. So it's going to be really good to, partly it's going to be his journey, but there's so many other things as well. So it's going to be really good to hear from one of the writers in this country who's being ignored with their speculative writing and has now blown up big time, being nominated for major awards in that area. So that is really important, and that's what we're all about. That's what we're doing. So, Dr. Courttia Newland.
Before I get started, I would just really like to thank Khadija, of course. I don't know if Khadija has been thanked, but if she hasn't, can we just do that now? I ain't got your energy, man. I don't know how. I stopped a long time ago. You're carrying on. And I'm just really grateful and glad that you're doing that. I'm going to jump straight in just because, I want to keep as much time for questions as possible, and we are starting a little bit late. So this is Catching the Spirit. This talk is called Black British Explorations in Speculative Fiction. I'm just going to take you through a lot of my influences from when I was a young man to when I started to write, and then talk a little bit about some key people who inspired me. It won't be everyone, so sorry. I always hate name checking people because then you leave people out and then people get annoyed with you. But so I didn't really say very much about what's going on in the contemporary sense of things because there's so many people now. But I did talk about two people, just really in brief, who I thought were really instrumental and key when I was coming up, when the landscape was pretty barren. So I'll mention them. I'll talk about my very non-literary influences, and I'll talk a little bit about my work and how they fit into my work. My first science fiction experience was a dark black box of a space. A blackness so complete I couldn't even see my small fingers wriggle before my eyes. There was the feel and perceived movement of bodies that told me I wasn't alone, though I saw no one. A vibration of bumping feet meeting floorboards muted by the sounds surrounding me, even as they merged as one, accompanying pulse. I inhaled a heady mix of curried meats, perfume and cologne, weed and cigarette smoke. When the bass came, it amplified not only the music that gave it life, but the vibe, the feeling of floating outside one's body, the communal stamp of dancing feet on all sides. The first science fiction experience I recall was not projected by a 35mm film or found in pages of a well-thumbed second-hand book. It was encountered within a blues dance, assailed by sound. I struggle to describe the feeling, though I'll try. A space where my own black body found itself cushioned by others inadvertently, bass felt as much as heard. The eardrum ringing bleeps and bloops of the echo chambers, loud and continually more distant reverberations, growing softer, softer still, fading away into almost nothing. It's ludicrous to say my feet moved with the adults around me. No, it felt most as if I was willingly stuck, hung in black amber, all gravity dispelled, consumed by utter darkness so weighty and thick that walls, ceiling and floor were forever banished. This universe existed without limits. Even when I closed my eyes, it made no difference, open or shut. My lack of vision was one and the same. I waited for the echo to return, providing our space with the next digitized tone to come. Something that always suggested to me, in the years to follow, the cumulative weight of paraffin wax growing inside a lava lamp. Sound swelled to bursting, separated, set free. As the music performed this wonder, I very much believed the same was true for myself. In those life-defining moments, my young mind fell into a waking dream of the cosmos. I wondered, is this what it's like? Eminent writer and scholar Louis Chude-Soke. If I mangle people's words and names, please forgive me, okay? Because sometimes I've only seen them on stage. Louis Chude-Soke connects the echo and reverb of Jamaican sound system manipulation to the origins of our known universe, the Big Bang itself. He reminds us that science, in Jamaican vernacular, is synonym for bush magic, of the transformative possibilities inherent in musical technology once invented as a global capitalist tool, bent and shaped by the African diaspora to meet our needs, as with so many things in this newer world we're forced to engage. I urge anyone that's interested in dub's connection with science fiction to read Chude-Soke's Dr. Satan's Echo Chamber, Reggae, Technology, and the Diaspora Process. It's fascinating to see my own childhood musings given weight in academic rigor. Chude-Soke makes special mention of Overton Brown, better known as Scientist, one of the great dub producers of the 1970s. As a young boy, my burgeoning science fiction tastes were absolutely shaped by craning my neck upwards, mystified, to pick out his colourful album covers, easily my favourite LP designs. Although my parents had moved our family to Uxbridge by then, we travelled to Harleston to visit my grandmother pretty much every weekend. On the roundabout trips my mother and father made to see friends that usually took up the whole day, we'd often enter Hawkeye Records on Harleston High Street, run by my late uncle Winston Denny's old school friend, Roy Forbes Allen. While my parents talked and I and my brother gnawed on our choice of dumpling or patty, I'd gaze at the Scientist covers placed high on shelves, or red, orange and green and blue records that lined the walls, far from the reach of us kids. Scientist albums often looked like comic books, and were imaginatively titled Scientist Meets the Space Invaders, or Scientist in the Kingdom of Dub, or a more recent offering, Scientist dubs culture into a parallel universe. His covers are illustrated with the same rich colours and superhero imagery as comics too. Usually scientists in costume, gloves and boots, waging battle with his larger-than-life nemesis, be they Rastafarian supervillain or human-sized Pac-Man. Sometimes there was even a comic book style logo in the top left-hand corner, showing our hero in a crouch, wrestler's grappling pose. Illustrated by Oldham-born Tony McDermott, the artist behind iconic cover art for the legendary Green Sleeve record label and Channel One. The duo produced classics that encourage young minds like mine to believe the fusion of our culture and science fiction were inextricable. For me, there was no separation between scientists and the wider world. To exist on those shelves was validation. Writer, novelist, and cultural critic Erna Brudner cites reggae as a black space, detailing the effect of Jamaican culture on the music and vice versa in terms overt yet deeply latent. Further persistent connections emerge in the broad scope of where the music is appreciated abroad, who it touches and connects in numerous ways, a plethora of less likely conclusions drawn by global and temporal recipients such as me. At much the same time, I was hit by another worldwide phenomenon, Star Wars. The encounter began an interaction that, much like my connection with reggae, persists to this day. It was the scope and detail of the world that caught my attention. It felt real and wonderful, a galaxy imprinted on my imagination, perhaps somewhere I could live too. While I was very much a fan of the whole gang, Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie and the droids, when Lando came into the family, I, like many other black kids across the globe I imagine, developed a love for the movies far deeper than pure fan worship. Lando was suave, smooth talking and handsome, a businessman and potential lover. Okay, he was also a traitor, but within his comparatively spare minutes of screen time, he redeemed himself to become a hero. I soaked up the idea that a black man insisted in Lucas's galaxy, dressed better than everyone, and what's more, owned a Millennium Falcon beforehand. This was heaven. For the first time, my interest in science fiction went beyond immersing myself within the speculation of others. That's when I began to think of stories that I could tell, and began telling them, orally, on the page, in song. The creative fallout of those films was huge. Mainstream sci-fi universes appeared everywhere I looked, from television's Buck Rogers to Battlestar Galactica, Metal Mickey and Knight Rider, Alien, and the revamped Star Trek movies. My motto in those days was to watch everything. And if I watched it, I'd usually read the book tie-in as well, although I went through my fill of non-adaptive fiction alongside them. what has happened to book tie-ins? Like, do they even happen now? Now people are kind of like adapting from books, but there's not book tie-ins. It's kind of, that was like a big thing back in the day. The first 2 books of Nicholas Fist's Starstormers series portrayed characters of colour, a black teenager named Mackenzie and a Southeast Asian girl, Sue. The inclusions were an inevitable draw, even if I couldn't find the remainder of the series at the second-hand bookstall in Shepherd's Bush Market or the library next door. I read the novels over and over instead, imagining my own conclusions for the stories. Z for Zachariah, June, Grimworld, 1984, and a host of obscure adult novels given by a friend of my grandmother's who worked at Gollancz followed. No one cared if the books were age appropriate for an 11-year-old. A black boy who read? I was given everything they could grasp. My continuing science fiction journey away from mainstream predilections remains steeped in Pan-African visions. Parliament, Funkadelic, Sun Ra, Grace Jones, Lee Scratch Perry, Mad Professor. On long car journeys, my mother would play the same 3 mixtapes on rotation, one of which included War's Galaxy. We listened to that song on repeat and never got bored. While it's true I was aware that most of my black science fiction needs were being met by music, and not so much in fiction, I can't say I minded as much as I noticed. On a panel for Bocas Lit Festival with Caribbean-American writer Tobias Bucknell, I remember saying it didn't bother me if the biggest film and television science fiction vehicles of my childhood ignored black characters or sidelined us. I just aligned myself with an art form born and controlled by us, and found myself completely served. If I managed to recapture that feeling I discovered in the black box space of a blues dance, that was good enough. Inevitably, I became drawn to art where a centrality of black science fiction was abundant. One night, travelling with my father to a blues party in a council estate, a group of older boys breakdanced in concrete walkways. Early hip-hop played from a portable tape deck, electronic drum machine sounds and synths. My father commented with enthusiasm, and we walked on to the dance, where reggae and dub was being played. I've always seen that point of my life as a transition where river met sea, merging and colliding. I was a few years shy of becoming a teenager. What I saw wasn't new to me, but always represented a shift in the tastes of a new generation, an undeniable passing of the baton. That early hip-hop, which was called electro, a far more speculative fiction-sounding name by far, underwent a healthy obsession with outer space, aliens, and technology. Herbie Hancock's AI-inspired rocket seemed to never leave my turntable. Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Forces' Planet Rock, Time by Al Nayfish, and Man Parrish's hip-hop bebop all carried me to a place of deep inner speculation. The return of Captain Rock, Egypt, Surgery by the world-class Wrecking Crew featuring a young Dr. Dre, not only gave breakdancers a soundtrack to create stunning, injury-defying moves, but borrowed equally from P-Funk and disco, fusing them with the European machine-based music of German bands like Kraftwerk. In doing so, a whole new genre of music was created that fueled a generation of young people like me with an ongoing aesthetic of passionate futurism. This blend of rap, comics, and African diaspora speculation would re-emerge as the theme of Outkast's second studio album, 80 Aliens. Released in 1996, the long player was both a nod to what came before and an expression of how isolated the Atlanta, ATL, group felt from mainstream American society. 80 Aliens is a throwback and a step forwards. A sonic sankofa that became an instant classic. Going back a few years from that recording to a period between my mid to late teens, I left school, grew disenchanted with college, and dropped out to get a full-time job in the nationwide stationery retailer Ryman's. I don't know if anyone was in my earlier thing when I said I did stack shelves. Stack shelves. But I was in the basement. I've got a whole film about that. I've written about that kind of experience. Well, actually, a science fiction TV series where the main character works not Ryman's, he works in Argos. So I used to work in the basement. I used to be a picker in Argos, and I worked in the basement, and I was sending all you lot stuff upstairs. So I did that. I did that while I was writing The Scholar, basically, which was my first novel. Anyway, that's a whole other story. I'd not long started when I was introduced to a new music genre that subsumed me for almost a decade, the UK rave scene. As an art form, It's probably the most closest to science fiction, or at least a futuristic vision of the contemporary moment, as any genre I've ever taken part in. The first rave I attended was Energy at Brixton Academy during the summer of 1989. There were fitful white strobes, psychedelic UV visuals high on lighting gantries, beams of green lasers piercing candy floss smoke that formed abstract shapes in darkness. The music was a hybrid mix of house music piano chords over pacey hip-hop breaks, acid house synths and effects. The crowd were more inner city and multicultural than any I'd ever experienced. Honestly, it's the first time I've been raving where I saw loads of white people. I was like, what is going on? This is really weird. I've never seen this before. So, over years and many variations of raves I attended, clubs, illegal warehouses, illegal fields in the middle of nowhere, what struck me most was the structure of those parties, which echoed the blues dances I saw as a child. These always culminated in the dance-heavy abandon of DJs who took ravers into the midnight hours, the music fast and loud, the bass resonating, its vibrations felt deep in your chest. By the early hours, say like 3 to 4 a.m., where the blues selector would typically play heavy dub, the rave DJ would play what we called ambient, an almost formless and drum-like style of electronic music made to aid the come-down of ravers, once they from what, and wind down of the rave itself. I relished this point of the night. It awarded me the chance to return to that floating out-of-body experience that enveloped me years before. In another dark and black box of a space, on the cusp of adulthood, I was propelled into a living futurescape. Everything about that UK scene was heavily influenced by speculative futurism and the musical tastes of black British musicians. Classics like A Guy Called Gerald's Voodoo Ray and Nicolette's Usinene gave UK dance culture African futurist soundtracks long before the term was coined. Psychedelic fashion and computer-generated music, the visual iconography projected high above the audience, the UV lighting, even the flyers bore its digitized thumbprint. Early artwork depicted alien landscapes and abstract visions by artists like the renowned Junior Tomlin. Comic book influences and pop culture references were all part of the visual template. Future Assassins, Shut Up and Dance, SL2, the Ragga Twins, and 4 Hero were just some of the acts he prophesied where the music would go by including dancehall vocals over beats. The rave scene accelerated, morphing and evolving at a dizzying rate. In a few short years, the musical stars went from acid house to hardcore to drum and bass before finally emerging as jungle, the art form at its blackest and most diasporic. The name originally created by Ibiza record label head Paul Ibiza to describe rave's most pervasive form drew contention for racist connotations, yet at its heart still concerned itself with taking blackness as far into the future as musicians' equipment and imaginations could go. Time-stretched dancehall vocals gave reggae artists a drawn-out, robotic, auto-tuned draw. Dialogue from Terminator and the iconic voice of Darth Vader were sampled as ad-libs. The lasers, smoke machines, and visuals of the early rave scene might have retracted somewhat, though still remained in use. All of these influences fired my mind, from the days of being a wandering child until my late teens, where I began to write in earnest, instigating my own developing science fiction vision. I wholly believed it was possible to create black lives to tell these stories, having barely known anything else. My first ever written piece was a speculative fiction superhero tale where a man contacts aliens and is given a magic belt which affords him every superpower in the known universe. I was like, why not have my cake and eat it? I called it Action Man. Don't laugh, man. I was 8. Even though, well, I was 9, sorry. Even though I was only 9, I knew I'd have trouble with that one, so I told myself it was a working title. I used toy action figures to perform various stories that starred my hero. Even though the figure that played the lead role was white, I imagined him as black. Crazy, right? Or maybe not. As a child who had lived for several years in a majority white environment, I still imagined an African futurist world. Why? I believe it was my cultural reference points, the alternatives that I was presented with. When I desired to write science fiction with black protagonists, I found myself desiring to read them. Not only was I searching for any black stories from anywhere in the diaspora, I was picky. I wanted them set in the UK to better reflect my life. Unfortunately, there were none that I knew of. When I didn't get what I needed, I gravitated to black stories I could find, which were mostly set in the US, portraying inner city realisms. I could relate to that experience, and so the work I produced drifted in that direction instead. For some reason, maybe proximity, it took a long time to encounter Delaney and Butler. By that stage, I was a young adult. In some strange twist of fate, I'd become a published author, something which helped to expand my knowledge of what others were doing in my field. By this process, I encountered the science fiction visions of Pete Kalu and Tosin Coker. These Nigerian British authors envisaged universes where technology and space travel entwine with African diasporic culture in ways rich and surprising, steeped in practice and wildly imaginative. Kalu's 1997 novel Black Star Rising, described by his publisher Express as a new genre of cyber noir, sees 5 black astronauts on an AI-controlled spaceship hurtling across a vast alien galaxy. Characters descend from royal Rasta bloodline and trace their roots back to the royal prophet Robert Nesta Marley. Others speak in a mix of Caribbean greetings, yes you, and Swahili, kumbe, to express the astonishment. One crew member suspects their captain is a robot, as she never tires or shows emotion, while Ghana is in dispute with a race known as the Kaigans of the Zanga galaxy. It's an aesthetic that, rather than centering solely on Britain, or even Nigeria, is sure-footed in locating itself as part of the diaspora. The novel is pioneering in many distinct ways, but this outlook in particular. The protagonist of Coker's 2010 novel, Let Sleeping Gods Lie, also travels the expanse of space, though her vehicle is the soul, her powers close to limitless. Zabaya speaks via telepathic communication, changes her clothes by molecular alteration, and belongs to a race of Africans known as the Nine Bloods. Like Kalu's characters, Zabaya's aura grows bright enough to be noted, and she also consorts with royalty. Her ability to transform into a spaceship comes from a control of her chakras that enable them to appear externally, creating a field that mimics the composition of atoms. Such African-centered ideas, which may seem outlandish to mainstream readers of Western speculative fiction, are in fact a skillful blend of science fiction and fantasy that produces concepts no more eccentric than the possibility of fire-breathing lizards that fly, or mermaids. We mine our Africans' heritage beliefs and legends, creating myths and spiritual practices in the way that Battlestar Galactica, to cite an example, mines Greek mythology, in the creation of principal characters like Apollo and Athena, or the way Paul Atreides, hero of Dune, references the Atreidai, descendants of a mythological Greek king Atreides. I write knowing full well these things are understood within our communities, but would like to emphasize the power such a shift in focus has, as writers and readers of all kinds. This decentering towards realities of our own causes discomfort for some, but are a balm for those who need it. Even so, it's difficult to deny that finding a publishing home for such aesthetics, I think in the UK, I'm thinking in particular here, is sometimes tougher than the writing itself. In the beginnings of what would become an illustrious writing career, 3-time Hugo Award winner N.K. Jemisin couldn't land an Egyptian-themed novel, The Killing Moon, as recently as the mid-2000s. Although the novel gained Jemisin an agent, it was rejected until she went back to rewrite her first novel. I believe passionately in finding the joy that comes from research, gaining knowledge, and implementing your finds into creating fictional worlds that please us, especially as my experience was similar to Jemisin's during the 2006 writing of my novel, A River Called Time. Sorry. I too put that novel aside and worked on other projects. Despite this, the pull of imagination that held me close since I was a small child, that weightless feeling and fascination of the black box room, the glitter of starlight that caused me to look up in wonder whenever I saw the night sky, would not leave me. I've spoken at length about the trials I faced while writing that novel, but in these recollections here, I began to reflect that I've rarely spoke about what brought me back. Around 2010 to 11, whenever I dreamt while waking, tales of speculative fiction were prominent in my mind. I had the idea for a novel I was excited about and decided to test the fictional world by writing a single short story of preparation. That short, Scarecrow, chilled the hell out of me and excited me at the same time. I began to write another, and another, and another. By 2014, a collection that I called Cosmogramma was completed. Honestly, I don't recall being as fired up about a project for a long time. Speculative fiction allowed me to test the boundaries of my imagination and explore a side of myself hitherto untapped. I've written several spin-off projects connected to worlds from that connection. Link, Scarecrow, and Utoma. All became proposed film or TV projects. Another has been optioned. For me, Cosmogramma has been a creatively rich undertaking that exploded into my life Big Bang style, never ceasing to give off an energy far greater than its original size. The title of the collection itself, Cosmogramma, derives from an album of the same name by renowned US Afrofuturist musician Stephen Ellison, aka Flying Lotus. I actually tweeted him and said I've written a collection, well, I tagged him. I said I've written a collection and I've borrowed your name. Is that all right? And he retweeted it, so I was like, okay, cool. But then I think the publishers reached out to him just to make sure he retweeted it, and he was like, yeah. In turn, Ellison reinterpreted the motif of a sun symbol on that album cover, formerly used by Herman Blount, aka Sun Ra, a 50s jazz musician and early pioneer of the Afrofuturist movement. My own cover, designed by Michael Salu, very much an African futurist in his own right, is a reinterpretation of both. The collection's epigraph is taken from Sun Ra's album Linear Notes. The origin of my chosen title derives from Cosmogram, a two-dimensional geometric shape that represents a cosmology or understanding of the universe. That's what its definition is. Its usage spans the breadth of human history and is described by Thomas and Rodrigo as a means of inscribing and encoding memories by drawing connections between people and places through space and time. A contemporary interpretation of a cosmogram created by Houston Cornwell and entitled Rivers is on permanent exhibition in Harlem, New York at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. This artistic rendition links the lives of the historian and activist Arturo Alfonso Schomburg and the writer Langston Hughes, two major figures of the Harlem Renaissance. The painting is also inspired by the African ritual of ground markings. Today, many African diaspora authors based in Britain catch the spirit in our creations of differing and very personal speculative fiction worlds. The work is emboldening, visionary and stunning, forging connections and pathways reaching back into our past while imagining who we might be in the future. Or even reject the way of thinking wholesale if we prefer. Whatever we decide, it still comes from us. We stake claims for our bodies, histories, sexualities, identities and cultures to exist in places denied us for so long. Immerse ourselves in realities existing far from a gaze that insists in turning away from us. We should not mind. That is not our concern. Ours is to live. Through it all, the joy of what is, that simple spark of what it means to be and become, remains alive in us all. During this exciting time of intense creation and beyond, I consider it a privilege to peek into our collective futures.
Wasn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
That was absolutely fantastic. And I could identify that journey, music, TV, all kind of aspects in terms of shaping that. So we've got limited time because we've got some poetry. So I'm going to take about 2 or 3 questions. Give me statements, questions, anything longer, I'll cut you. So any questions or comments or anything at all? Of course, myself.
Brother, you preach to my soul. I'm waiting on the collection plate. I was thinking at the same time when you brought the rave culture up, what would you say at that time? Because I remember that was when I was kind of getting out of the hip hop promotion game. And when you talked about rave culture, I'm thinking, what was the drug of choice No, I'm just serious because when I went to graduate school and you mentioned ATLiens, that's when I found out white kids were listening to what we were listening to. And I heard some music playing. I go through the grad door. I'm thinking I'm gonna look at another brother, and I see this white boy in there jamming. I'm like, what? It's like they found out the secret sauce. And that's when I realized the drug of choice in a lot of these settings was different. And that's where I realized the drug of choice for young whites with the music tended to be alcohol.
No.
In America, it was alcohol at that time in the Midwest, and then for us, it was like weed.
Yeah, it was MDMA.
Okay.
MDMA, ecstasy.
Okay.
Also weed, lots of weed.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
And so in the UK, that's what was happening in the UK.
Oh yeah.
In terms of like when you took the warehouse scene, that took me back to a big warehouse we rented, packed out, and that's when were you able to maintain corporate control? Because during that era, that's when we lost the grassroots neighborhood people lost control of it. And that's when hip hop went corporate by mid '90s. And it was the similar thing happening in the UK.
Oh yeah, it happened. It went commercial very, very quickly. But what happens in the UK is really funny that as soon as it goes commercial, everyone goes underground to something else. So it just morphed. As it went, as soon as jungle went commercial, everyone went to garage. Like immediately. But also at the same time, there was a lot of crack in those days as well, and so it got really dark, and the music got darker, and it got violent and whatever, and so a lot of people fled that because they just wanted to go out and have fun. So that's when people started dressing up and wearing shoes again, wearing like blazers or whatever, and that was the whole garage scene was a more dressy up thing. Whereas when you went to like jungle, it was like just t-shirts. Well, you just came as you are. There was no dress code. You know what I mean, and it kind of people seem to think that it attracted a certain element and stuff. So yeah, when I first went there, it was a summer of love, man. When I first went raving and everyone's happy and hugging each other and whatever. By the time I came out of that scene, which is about the time when I was, when The Scholar was published and stuff, it was just really dark and you could just smell a lot of crack in the raves and stuff.
I know someone, just quick, in terms of your brilliant way you said, there's one thing you just missed out. About pirate radio stations.
Oh yes, I did. You know, you're so right. And I'm actually working on a project which is a TV show which is about pirates, and the pirates were pivotal. Without pirates, none of this stuff would have happened. We wouldn't have a drill or grime scene or anything. We wouldn't have One Extra and Capital Extra or any of those things. So yeah, I should have put that in there.
Okay, so
just a quick observation. I was delighted to hear about your influences and your background, and I was really delighted to see how you centred UK black music, particularly the musics that you talked about, and especially at a time when black music history is being documented by British Library and various people. And I just wanted to say it was fantastic because it was a revelation to me personally that you had that background, and it's one that I chime with and resonate because I went through that journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, even in The Scholar, I always try to nod to it and allude to it, like when they go to the jungle rave, and then by Society Within, they go into garage raving. And Society Within came out in 1999. So even between 97 and 99, it was kind of done, you know, and it was like garage was happening. And then by the 2000s, it was grime. It was so quick.
And then drill.
The question is, where did jungle start? I'm not going to be completely biased here, but anyway, any more questions?
Where? What part of London? You mean?
No, the Midlands.
Midlands! Leicester! DJSS, Leicester.
Anyway, you have to tell me more about this. Because I always believed it was East London, but no. Okay, cool.
But seriously, So, any more questions or comments about that? Can I ask you quickly? You touched on some. You started to name check, but I want to elaborate a bit more about your influence. You talked about, are there influences in terms of writers or thinkers in the UK context? Obviously, we know about the American context, but what about the UK context?
Well, that's why I was name checking Pete, because there was Pete and there was Tossin, but it was really difficult to find people, which is not to say that they didn't exist. But in my little journey, I really struggled to find people who being published. And like I said, in about 2006, I told my publishers that I was going to write A River Called Time. I told them, and I'd written the whole first part of it, and I gave it to them, and they were like, "You've got to be kidding me!" They were like, "There's no way we're gonna let you publish this. You can't do this. It's science fiction. You're an urban fiction writer. Why don't you stick to writing urban fiction?" Blah 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 blah. So there was all this stuff about it, and so I encountered how the brick wall into how difficult it was to get published. So when I looked around and I saw nobody else was kind of being published in that way, I could work out how it had happened. Basically. I don't. Do you know people?
It's interesting because obviously the influence of America is really, really powerful. But I think you can't write. I think the music is probably more the music side.
That's why I wanted to.
That
was my experience.
Definitely, if you look at the whole stuff around dub music was like so powerful.
Yeah.
The sound system culture, that bass culture, which influenced hip hop actually.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. But it was steeped in Afrofuturism, I believe.
Yes.
Afrofuturism. Yeah. Totally. Those guys were all like, it just felt like, it felt like space. It felt like that.
But it's interesting because I'm a bit older than you, but there were like various TV programs which I saw. Tomorrow's People. Who can remember Tomorrow's People?
Blake Seven.
Tomorrow's People.
Jaunting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wasn't really a Blake Seven fan, but that's
Oh.
Blake Seven. No, not really. Yeah. And even Red Dwarf.
Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
Was that one Space 2099?
Space
Space
99.
UFO. Anyone remember UFO?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
My son just read that. He loved it.
Yeah. The radio series is so much better.
Yeah. It was good.
Got to go back to the original.
War of the Worlds. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
The War of the Worlds. Record with Phil Lynott.
Yeah.
So any
Jean-Pierre
last
Jean-Jacques.
questions, because we're running behind schedule. I'm back, yes.
So with the new Black Panther soundtracks coming out, would you say that Amapiano and Afrobeats would be the new sound of Futurism?
Ooh.
I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's new in the sense that, look how long Afrobeats has really been around, or not in its current form, but there was a form of it before. So I think that stuff that's always been there, and there's always been a kind of African interpretation of futurism which came from the continent as well, and Victor UFO and people like that, that again, it's the same vibe I get when I hear that thing. I'm away. I'm like, this sounds like outer space and stuff. It sounds like you're tapping into something that's like on the spiritual plane. And so, I feel like in a sense, yes, it's new because people are expressing Afrofuturism through that, but in a sense, it's always been there as well. So
Okay. No other questions? That's great. Can you give a fantastic round of applause? And more importantly, everyone, there is Samantha. She's got a bookshop around the corner. I think it's got quite a few books are there, and quite a few authors for the next few days. So please spend your money. It's about supporting writers so they can do things like this for us. On that note, over to you, Khadija.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to just again reiterate. You're going to sign books. Courttia's going to sign books. Basically Samantha wouldn't let him go until he does anyway. So, but yeah, I love the way that Samantha sells books. She just really has not taken in the same way. She's not a Waterstones person. She's just like, this is the way that people share our work, and she's just all in it in a very different kind of vibe. So she's really good. So really supportive of that. Yes. And that's why I say we don't have to buy from Amazon. I know it's very useful. I know it can be very, casual. But at the end of the day, there are black bookshops online. You can get books out quickly too. Yes. So please, she's got an online bookstore. Everything here you're hearing from people this weekend, you'll see on her online bookstore. And if you don't, just ask her for it. So please do that. So the other authors today, she's got books there. After, we're going to start moving into getting prepared for Akila's book launch, debut poetry book, which is also an exciting factor. Yeah, so what have you got coming out next, Courttia?
Oh, well, I've got to say actually that essay is going to be part of a collection of essays called The Art of Opposition, which I'm working on now. I'm not sure when that's going to come out because it's kind of halfway through it. It's going to be a collection of essays about Black British arts. So yeah, look out for that. But film and TV and stuff there.
Great. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And we are releasing what your thing is filmed. We are going to be releasing it on YouTube at the end of the day. So nothing was hybrid and streamed, but you will have access to it. Because we basically wanted people who couldn't make it here to have their own festival, which they've got online on Sunday. It's a totally different thing. It's not hybrid, it's not streamed. So, but things will be released. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all